Thank you, Kobe, also to that wonderful start to the day. I think music is a great connector, actually. I'm here to talk to you today about what's inside a samosa and why samosa has come to represent social inclusion for me and community connection. But I'm not talking about any old samosa, I'm talking about this one. I cooked this. It was the first samosa I'd ever made. And I have a story about why that does represent inclusion for me, but before I get on to that, I want to tell you about the place that it was made, and it's the Kalamunda Community Learning Centre. If you can just indulge me, I know we don't get comfortable closing our eyes, but just close your eyes for a moment, and I want you to imagine this place. It's nestled in the hills, in natural bush, in an area close to Kalamunda Town Centre. There's lots of wildlife around, there's tall gum trees. As you enter the building, you're struck by an air of busyness and excitement because there are about 700 or 800 people in this centre, so you can imagine what that environment feels like. There are about 80 courses run through this centre. But it's not just the busyness and excitement that's in there and the energy, it's actually, there's a feeling of warmth and connection between all the people who are in there. So if you've got a picture of what that looks like, you can open your eyes. I wonder if any of you saw something like that in your mind. It looks a bit like a tin shed. It's actually an ex-golf clubhouse. And in the late 1970s, when it started as the learning centre, it was described as dilapidated back then. Not a lot has changed. The reality is, when you approach the centre, there's a sloping car park. There's lots of stairs to go into the centre. There is a ramp just down there, but you come to two doors that are pretty narrow and difficult to open. There's, just to add to the charm, some asbestos warning signs all around the building. It's full of second-hand donated furniture. It's got about, and it's run entirely, except for one paid creche staff member, it's run entirely by volunteers. No one seemed to be in charge in there. A couple of years ago when I first went there, it was run entirely on paper and cash systems. So I was looking for something to do a project for my master's on at the time, and I rang my supervisors and I said, I found it. I found this place I want to study. It is a wonderful place of community and connection. There's lots of happy people up there, all seem to be connected and doing things. I don't think anybody knows what they're doing up there though. It's fantastic, it's this little gem. So I called it a happy accident. And my supervisor said, I love the sound of that. Yes, please, go and do a proposal and come back to us. So I went away and I did a little bit of study and digging around, talked to a few people about the setup of this centre, and I rang them a couple of weeks later and I said to them, oh, I need to change the title of my thesis a bit. It's actually got to be No Happy Accident. Because what I discovered was that there was a really clear strategy, and this was set up in 1977. Over those 40 years, there was a really clear strategy and really clear principles that had underpinned this centre. And I really hope people don't get too easily offended in here. I'm about to get a little bit crass and use the F word. There's no other way to describe it. But it was feminism. And it's a bit of a stupid joke, but it was actually the F word of the late 1970s, and actually for the group of women that set it up, one of the things that they were most passionate about was inclusion. They really subscribed to the belief that feminism is good for everyone, where feminism improves the lot of women, it improves life for everyone. So they were really passionate about inclusion. This was a women's learning centre when it started, but it wasn't about shutting people out. There are other principles that underpin the centre as well, including that there was why I thought then no one seemed to be in charge in the centre. And the reason is because there's no single boss there. It's a shared decision-making group. So there were lots of principles that really fed into that. Now, I've mentioned that they were passionate about inclusion. If you remember that description of the reality of the centre and all the access issues, they were passionate about inclusion, but dealing with a lot of physical access issues. And Kiri's disappeared because I was going to point her out. But in an earlier Inclusion Solutions forum, she referred to a concept of if you can't deal with the pyramid the physical, functional, and then social access issues, you should consider flipping it. So really focus on social inclusion and getting as many people as you can in the doors and dealing with physical access issues, perhaps as they come up. They simply didn't have the funding to deal with those access issues. Now, how they did social inclusion, I think one of the biggest barriers for a lot of people accessing learning activities and social activities is cost. And this is something they dealt with really, really well. So one of the ways I mentioned, there are volunteers running the place. When I say there are volunteers running the place, every single person who signs up to that centre becomes a volunteer. So you can volunteer to be part of the organising group. You could be someone who works in the office, on the desk, answers the phone. You could be a volunteer tutor. All the tutors up there are not paid. You could sign up for one of those bigger roles. But even if you don't sign up for something, when you go to sign up for a course, you might think you're there to learn something, but actually you're also really there to be a part of running this huge organisation. And what they do, so when you sign up for a course, you also sign up to be part of a work group. And the work group tasks are really, really tiny but meaningful. So some of them are things like take the class roll for the semester, wash the tea towels on Monday for the first term, fill up the tea and coffee canisters on Wednesdays for the first term. My first course was sweeping the back veranda Mondays and Wednesdays for the month of September. Tiny, tiny jobs. But as someone said to me, when you take all those tiny little things, they make one great big thing. And the great big lovely thing that is the Learning Centre, it simply couldn't function. So everyone takes on that volunteer role, and it achieves two things. It keeps the costs ridiculously low. So it's $4 a week for a class there. But it also it makes people part of the centre right from the outset. So when you take on that task, suddenly, I really care about that back veranda. I check it all the time. Even not in September, it's my veranda. I've become part of that centre. I care about how it looks and how it's functioning. And it makes you a part of the team. So you're part of a work group team. You know that all those tiny little things add up to the reason why this runs so well. Now, one of the things that I think the people from the early days and has persisted through to now have always done so well is look for value in people. So as I said, when you sign up for a work group. But also when you go to the centre, they're very good there at asking you, what can you do? What skills do you have? What do you know? And when you have a question like that and a philosophy that is based so heavily on not what can you learn, but what can you teach or what can you do, you end up with a huge variety in the timetable. As I said, around 80 courses run through there by volunteer tutors, and that's what it looks like in a word map. There are 11 book clubs this semester, French, Italian, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, knitting, crochet, lace making, pottery, silversmithing, geology, write your life story, philosophy circle, Tai Chi yoga, and a lot more. If you can't find something to do on there, you possibly don't have any interest. There is always something that someone will do. But what I love about that is that has never come from a needs analysis. People at this place don't do a needs analysis. They do a what can you do analysis. So, and what that does is it creates value for a whole heap of the tutors who run these courses. And I want to just give you a quick story about someone who I think when you have this kind of philosophy, what it means to people. So part of my research, and I'm really privileged to be able to hear people's stories there. I'm very, very privileged to hear the stories that people have had through their lives. And one story I had that really, really struck me is of a man who retired and his marriage broke down and his kids left home all within a short space of each other. And he was on a slippery slope to that black hole of loneliness and depression. And someone said to him, why don't you go up to the Learning Centre and take a course? So he did, and he connected with people and he found friends, not just friends, but also acquaintances and people that he could wave to in the street. He was connected. And then someone said, why don't you teach a course? And he said, I'm a tradie, I don't teach a course. And they said, oh no, how about you teach a course, Handyman Skills for Women? It's now called, more politically correct, Home Maintenance. But when he taught it, girl power. I like that's what it was anyway. So he taught that and he became this esteemed tutor. People loved him. He got to know more people. Someone then said to him, how about you run for one of our coordinator roles, stand for election? And he said, oh no, I don't do that. I don't do office work. It's not me. He was a people person by his own admission, but he didn't want to do this. But he was coaxed into doing it. With some trepidation, he put his name forward, and he, by a really popular vote, he got one of the shared coordinator positions. And I could tell when he was telling me this story, he was really chuffed, very proud of himself. And I said to him, what did it feel like for you when that result came in? And with a huge smile on his face, he said, I really liked it. I felt like I mattered to people. And that for me, often when I tell that story, not in a big group like this, it brings me to tears because there was someone who we were going to lose to this awful thing called ageism, where we thank people for their years of service and paying tax, and then they're supposed to go off to this lovely land of retirement, and it's supposed to be wonderful. But for a lot of people, it's loneliness and isolation. And I say that in the context of the fact that statistics show that one of our highest age groups of suicide rates now is in age 65 and over. So we could have lost him. He is a person of value, and we could have lost him because we just saw a tradie who had retired. But he's involved with the centre. It's a little bit of a cautionary tale for me at the moment because a few weeks ago he injured himself and he is unable to drive. And I went down to see him and I said, how are you going with everything? He said, everyone's been great. I've got lots of friends and people come pick me up and take me to the shops and everything like that. Everything's great. But I have come to know the true meaning of loneliness. So for me, it really rings in my head, I think, the fact that when I spoke to one of the founding members of the Learning Centre, she said to me, inclusion and connection are not passive things. You can't put a welcome mat out and open the doors and say, we're here, come on in. You have to reach out into the community. You have to go out to where the people of need are and you have to bring them in. And the other thing for me with that story is it's an ongoing concern. We have to be vigilant. It's not a one-off, make a connection. You have to keep focusing on keeping those connections there. So what the heck does this all have to do with this samosa? Well, I was a newbie to this centre and I didn't really get what was going on in this centre. I signed up for some Indian cooking classes and I went along. I've been to other cooking classes. There's a certain expectation you have, so I went along. And on the day I went in, there was a young Indian lady there who had, I love that question we ask, and they're very good at the centre. They see someone has this young Indian neighbour move in next door and they say, oh, can you cook? We need an Indian teacher, Indian cooking teacher. That'd be great. So she got connected into the centre anyway, but she turned up, she didn't know what she was doing. She'd never done this before. She was new to the area, no family in the area. Her husband is a FIFO worker, so no real support around. Anyway, I turned up to the first class and there were no recipe sheets. There were some ingredients. She wasn't really sure what we were going to do with them, and her 3-year-old daughter was there. So I'm standing there processing the OH&S issues and the lack of professionalism and structure and what is going on. For my $4 a week, I better be getting my value for money. So I watched and we got a lesson in how to make a samosa and I got a lesson in social inclusion because I watched as she said something about the recipe sheets and someone said, don't worry about that. Tell me the ingredients and I'll write them down and I'll email them to everyone. Everyone give me your email and I'll send them out to everyone. She said, I couldn't get many ingredients at the shops as Coles and Woolies didn't really have what I wanted. Someone said, oh no, the Canning Vale supermarkets. I'll go down there for you and I'll get them. I'll collect money from everyone and do that. Or you can come with me. Shall I pick you up and we'll go on a little outing and do that together? And then there was the matter of her daughter, and someone said, oh, well, no, because you're a volunteer tutor and we really want these cooking lessons, the centre will organise a volunteer babysitter to come in and sit in the next door room with your daughter while you teach. But this week, I've got some paper and pens here and we'll draw that. Someone passed me some samosa pastry. I'm going to roll some shapes out. So I had this kind of epiphany and I wanted to walk over to her at one point and I said, oh, just to let you know, they're not going to let you fail. You're not leaving here, like after one lesson, not being part of this. You're part of this community. They're going to make sure of that. And I thought it really was just a lovely lesson in how people who kind of quite humble, just going about their business. One of the final parts of that story was someone came up to me after and said, I heard you're doing a project, what's it on? And I said, social capital and social inclusion. And they said, what's that? And I said, it just happened here. So, but I also love samosas, but I love a good analogy just as much. So for me, I kind of came up with what's happening there? What's the analogy that I can take from that? There are some kind of key ingredients to a samosa. Potato forms the bulk of a samosa, and for me, that is the group of people. When a group of people come together, especially a group like this at the Learning Centre, a group of humble, unassuming people get together and make something happen. The P's for me represent the principles that float around in amongst everything that's going on in there. The spices, of course, are the attributes and the talents that everyone brings to that centre. Huge varieties, you can see, makes a very unique flavour. And the pastry, again, 2 fairly simple ingredients, or maybe 3, flour, water and a bit of ghee. Coming together, the pastry represents all the connections that people make, because that's actually what keeps the organisation strong. It's 42 years old now. A lot of the founding members aren't there anymore. The principles are embedded in everyone and inculcated, really. When you take courses there, you get these lessons in social inclusion, you understand how it works. And when you get those ingredients right and you get the temperature of the oil right by including everyone in your community, people are fed and people are nourished. And just to seal that analogy, Denver and his team have organised for some samosas for everyone. So you can have a think about this and be nourished, please.